and welcome to our 13th installment of Game Starter. My name is Helen, and we are very glad that you made it. That's Gamecity Hamburg. We are the location initiative funded by the city of Hamburg, and our job is to support the local games industry. Support, well, that's what we do, and we do it with a number of funding programs and also cool events like this one. Today's panel is all on game balancing. A topic that's highly relevant for all our game enjoyment, I'd say. But we can tell you, well, a bit about it, but not enough for you to learn all that much. So we have invited 3 experts. We'll talk about their experience in the field, how they started out, and what they would advise all newcomers to know before they come into the field. But before we get to that, we want to tell you about another cool event that is happening in Hamburg soon, which is the Hamburg Games Conference, taking place on March 1st and 2nd here in Hamburg in the Altona Museum. We will talk 2 days all about invest in games. This event is great for socializing, meeting new people, and you've got it, learn quite a lot about invest in games. For this, we've got a lot of great panels and talks, for example, by René Habermann, Linda Rendel, and Christoph Wiegemann. We hope we'll see you there. Let's take a quick look at our agenda before we dive into the topic of game balancing. We are right now at the welcome and introduction part, as you might have guessed. Then we will move on and introduce our panelists to you, or they will introduce themselves. Then we will have a quick discussion round, or not that quick, to be honest. We prepared quite a lot of questions to learn all about game balancing together with you. But of course, you can feel free to ask your own questions at any time in the chat. And if there's quite a lot of them, which there usually is, we will also hold a Q&A round starting around 7 p.m. And we will wrap this wonderful evening up at around 7:30 p.m. So, who have we brought with us? We are joined by 3 wonderful game balancing experts. First up, there's Christian Holländer. He's a senior game designer from Hamburg. Same goes for Joel Griebel. He's a senior game designer at Daedalic. And last but not least, we've got Olaf Bulas. He's a game designer at THREAKS. Welcome to the 3 of you. Olaf, maybe you might take the lead from here and tell us a bit about yourself. What's it like at THREAKS, where you're working currently? What are you working on, and how long have you been there?
Hi, I'm Olaf, and I'm from the THREAKS. THREAKS is a game dev company located in Hamburg, Germany, and I'm the game designer there. As game designer, I concept game mechanics and integrate them later inside the Unity engine. The majority of features we are working on require balancing. And lately, most of my time I spent in MyRobots, which is a great tool to prepare concepts and work together with a team on it. And I'm for over 7 years at THREAKS, and I wasn't anywhere before that. Yeah.
Thanks for joining us. Joel, what about you? What's it like at Daedalic right now? How did you get into the industry, and anything else you want to introduce about yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Joel Griebel. I'm a senior game designer at Daedalic Entertainment for around 4 years now. I started there with the project Gollum, and still on the project of Gollum, where I did concept work, prototyping, level design, and also balancing. I've been in the industry for around 6.5 years now. I worked before I went to Daedalic in 2019, I worked at SM Entertainment as a marketing and PR assistant. And before that, I did an internship at King Art and also did some balancing there for the dwarves there. Yeah.
Awesome. Great to have you. Thanks. And last but not least, Christian, what was the way into the games industry like for you, and what are you currently doing?
Hello, yeah, as you introduced me, I'm Christian Holländer from Bytro. I'm there almost 7 years now, so I guess my path in the gaming industry is similar to the one of Olaf. I've not seen any other company yet. I came there directly from my studies. And at Bytro, I did almost anything a game designer can do. Only the last 2 years, I focused mainly on the balancing aspects, where I balanced basically the entirety of one of our games, which is called Iron Order. And then lately, I did a big update to another of our games, which is called Supremacy 1914. Still on the side, I also deal with project management topics and design features as well. We are 3 designers, more or less, that take care of 3 games, so we have to split forces a bit.
Sounds like you bring a lot of knowledge to the table, definitely. So thanks for being here. I'm also joined by my colleague Amanda, who will now take the torch and dive right into all the game balancing questions with you.
Thank you, Helen. I will start right up with the first question. What does game balancing look like for you, especially in the games you work on? Maybe Joel can start.
Yeah, it's a little bit different from other games if you don't work on a strategy game, which I did before. So I had both sides, strategy games and now an action adventure. Action adventures or games like that are a little bit different to balance, since you need a lot of intuition and need to try a lot of stuff. Like if you work on, in my experience, if you work on the strategy game, you do a lot of work in Excel and with math and statistical analysis. But on such action games or jump runs and stuff, it's really important to be in the engine and have lots of iteration cycles and going over the stats all on and on again, basically.
Thanks. Christian, do you want to get on next?
Yeah, sure. What does balancing look like for me? It has many aspects, actually, and it also depends on how big we can go in our tasks. Like sometimes, or a lot of times, we just do small minor updates, and then it's me sitting in my booth on my own and figuring them out based on user feedback, for example, or on metrics that we see in our analytic tools. When we have a bigger topic, it's a collaboration between the other game designers and me, and also the team leads and such. So then it involves a lot of communication. But the hands-on work is nitty-gritty work on Excel, and then implementing it into the engine and testing it in test environments and later on beta environments together with users until it sees the light of the day.
Olaf, is that the same for you?
Yeah, it's pretty similar. It depends pretty much on the genre. So for a mobile title which had time management, I was also working over 70%, I would say, in Excel sheets, and then just importing the sheets into the engine. But for example, for Morph, which is a top-down shooter, I was pretty much experimental with it. I could just test out stuff, play it on my own. But as already mentioned by the 2 others, it's very important to have like this play test and then iterate on it. And yeah.
So I heard playtesting and implementing. What's your typical workflow? Also, does that differ with different companies or team sizes? Christian.
Yeah, the workflow also depends again on the size of the task. If it's just some small changes, I basically do, as just said, I create them in a Excel sheet, which is our balancing tool mainly. And I involve a lot of user feedback. So I have to have the overview of all the systems that I can touch with my changes. Also, sometimes the feedback is not what is actually needed in the game, because it would also touch other areas. So we have to find a middle ground where we can apply the changes. And once that is done, the theoretical part and the work in Excel, it goes into the game, and then we test if it actually plays out as we intended the changes. And for bigger changes, the workflow is more or less the same, just with many more iterations and more feedback loops. So the feedback we get from the community is more organized, and also we are more active, and also internally, because bigger changes also can affect the game economy itself more. We also have to justify our changes to our team leads and chiefs and whatnot. So big changes just mean much more communication and evaluation.
Joel, what's that for you? What's that like for you?
For me, it's like at first I start alone and basically take a number. For example, if we take enemy awareness of you, how fast enemies see you or how far you can jump, basically start with a number, and then, which was one of quite a big learning for me in the early days, was I take that number and double it or half it to make big steps, and then go in the direction I think it's right, and then double it again to corner the correct value. This is a much faster way to determine the correct value than going in small steps. And I enter the number, playtest, and until it feels right for me, and then I go to my colleagues, my game design colleagues, and show to them, get feedback from them, do this loop, and go back to the drawing board and work based on the feedback then. And this continues on until we have the right numbers.
Olaf, is there anything different at THREAKS, or can you add up to that?
Yeah, it's very near to it. We are a smaller team with 70 people, so I'm the only game designer there. So it's not like I need to justify my game design decisions, but we tested then on our own at first, and see if my values, which work in my opinion, also work for others. And as designer, it's always the problem that you try to adjust something or tweak it in a way which you think it's right, but you are the designer, so you exactly know about the feature, and most of the time it gets too difficult for others to play because you are much better, because you know everything about it. And yeah, I know that often I really need to make the feature much easier than I think it should be, and then it's even the right way, because the other people will still have maybe difficulties with it. And yeah, I think I go around a little bit in a different direction. I'm sorry.
No worries. I heard about Excel a lot. What are other tools you use for balancing the most? Olaf again.
Yeah, besides of Excel, we have our own game settings window in Unity, which our coders made us. So it's like a window where all the features are merged together, and I as designer can access them very directly, just searching for them. So I don't need to go through the whole hierarchy of Unity or through certain prefabs. I can just directly search through a window, which makes it much faster. And inside there, every value I can tweak is exposed, and I can just tweak it directly through a game settings window, which is very neat.
Christian, how's that for you?
Excel is still the main tool, but we have our own tools that we developed especially for our engine, where we have a interface between Excel and the engine itself. And that tool we use to get an overview of all the content we have in the game. And we implement the balancing changes through that tool. And then we also get a like a checklist before we bring it directly into the game, if those changes are actually the ones that we wanted to do. Because sometimes you have a big table in Excel, especially when there is like 800 items that you change at once, then you lose the overview, and having this double check helps to not implement any errors. Then again, I would not frame it a tool that I use to do the balancing, but our bug reporting and also the Discord channels help a lot, because still sometimes you miss things, and then you have to get the feedback from the people that play it hands-on, because I only have 2 eyes. If I include another designer who checks it, it's 4 eyes. But out there is tens of thousands of people who can provide much more feedback. So also using that a lot.
Joel, how's what are you using?
I'm basically not using Excel at all for the current project. I'm basically only working in the engine, or 90% of the time I'm working in the engine with the plugins we have there and the tools I have there. And the other 10% are probably other games I go into and check how they did it. How does it feel? It's how do the parkour mechanics, like jumping and walking, how do they feel? Why do they feel good? And translate it to our game, basically.
So how much of your time do you actually spend in game balancing, as neither of you hold the position of an official game balancer? Joel.
Now, basically, because we're nearing the end of the production, it's basically none. And over the whole project, I think it was like 20% of my time working on game balancing, since I was working from the start there. So there's also concept and prototyping phase, which a lot of game designers who are on the project now didn't work on, for example, who have more percentage in balancing basically than on other aspects. So for me, it's only 20%.
Olaf, how much percent is that for you?
Yeah, it depends pretty much on the project, but at the moment I would say above half of my time is spent in balancing.
And Christian?
For the last, I would say about 2 or 3 years, it is roughly 60%-ish. So the majority, I would say, maybe a bit less. The last few months, it was even more, because I basically more or less only did balancing. But over the entirety of a project, it is a bit less, since we have to also take up other responsibilities. So as the others said, it depends on the state of the project, or the goals of your specific team or whatever. And right now we had the luxury that I can invest more into it, but that may also change in the future again. It really depends on the current goals.
That's amazing to hear about these differences. What does your typical workday look like? Does such a thing as a typical workday even exist, Joel?
Is it a question for the current time, like my current typical workday?
Yeah.
So at the moment, I'm basically testing the game and doing review work, and then trying to fix bug fixing and testing the game is basically my current workday as a whole.
And Olaf?
I don't think there's really a typical workday for me. It feels really like every day is a new challenge, and every day I get something new. Sometimes I can balance over multiple days combat features, and on other days I need to spend my time in reviewing narratives or code features, or coordinating multiple departments to make the game design work. So yeah, lots of changes.
Christian, I think that might be the same for you.
Exactly. I would say there is no typical day. Every day is different, unless you have one task that or one mission ahead of you that lasts longer. So for the last few weeks, the typical day was in the morning starting the test machines where I test my stuff, also starting Excel and Discord, and then switch between the 3 instances to make changes, put them on the test machine, test them, read Discord again, add more feedback. So that was my typical day for longer time, plus meetings, of course, and syncing with team members. But that stopped more or less now. So my typical day tomorrow will be a very different one. And in the next week, again, a different one. So yeah, I wouldn't say there's a typical day.
And so Olaf already said it, but I'm going to ask again, how big is the team you're working on? And that's, I think, a question for the others. And do all of those do game balancing as a part of different job titles? Christian, you said you had colleagues who do that too.
Yeah. So at Bytro in a total, we are 80 people, but we are spread into, or about 80, but we are spread into different disciplines. And the team I'm working on is, as I said in the beginning, based on the live games. And there we have experts of all areas regarding the live games. We have community management, front-end developers, back-end developers, PHP. Like I said, more or less even 4 game designers, but it's a bit tricky with our team structures. So there's one I can work very close with. And then there's also another game designer who has more experience in game balancing than the others compared to me, or maybe even a bit more because they're a bit longer. But he is in a separate project right now, so I can only grab his opinion at times. And when it comes to the feedback, I get the most feedback from the other game designer colleagues, but not like on a very detailed level. I do the nitty-gritty detail work in balancing and then ask them for feedback on the overview that I provide, because as also Olaf, I think, said earlier, you have a picture in your head how everything will turn out in the game and then test that. And this picture I present. And after I got the feedback, I will then also ask other colleagues, like an artist, because we're all gamers, right? So how do you think it should play? What do you think would happen if I take out this unit, for example, right? Or if we would have this feature in a unit now, and what else I could ask colleagues who are not as knowledgeable with balancing but still play games, right? So yeah, I basically ask everyone in the team, but the game designers more frequently and yeah, more often.
Cool, thank you. Joel, how's that for you?
I think we're around 50 people, and of those, around 6 are game designers, and only the game designers do the balancing. And we split it up, like we have one game designer doing camera work, we have one game designer who does stealth, one does parkour, and to get a fresh view on those topics, we switch around. So basically, I would do 1 week of parkour balancing, and then I would switch with the game designer who does stealth, and we would switch around our topics to get a fresh view on things, and also to don't get bored of the same thing doing over and over again.
Right, I just thought, yeah, it never gets boring that way. Olaf, I think you're bored neither with your 17 colleagues, you said?
Yes. Yeah, the biggest department is a code department, and many of the art departments are flexible and don't work only as, for example, concept artists, but also involved in 3D modeling, tech art, and so on. Yeah, if I want to test a feature, most of the colleagues are interested in it and want to test it. Some are less, but that's okay. And yeah, they're a big part, I would say, for balancing at first, because I don't play test directly with strangers, but more just with a company. And yeah, they are really important to get this rough estimation at the beginning and then play test with real people. Real people with others.
Thank you. Are there any typical challenges in game balancing that occur in most projects, even though your projects are pretty different? Joel?
It's hard to say. I don't think there's like the typical challenge. It depends on the genre and what project size you're working on. With a bigger project size, you have more time to balance, but it's also sometimes hard to keep track of everything. So if the project is bigger, you need to have everything in mind that you balanced before or that others balance. So it's a lot of communication and documentation you need for bigger projects, for example. Yeah.
Christian, do you have any typical challenges?
Yeah, I would say like for starters, the typical challenge would be dealing with numbers a lot, right? But since I like that, so that's not a challenge for me. Or yeah, I learned to like it very early in my career. But for now, I think the biggest challenge would be opinions, because balancing a game means changing the game, right? And if you do it regularly, then there's regular changes to a game. And finding the sweet spot is always a challenge. You can make the math as long as you want and see, okay, whatever, this unit is as strong as before, but because the use case changed, that may averse of the idea of the unit, or that may make people not happy because now they have to use the unit differently, although numbers wise it's equally strong. So finding the sweet spot is always a big challenge, I would say.
Olaf, what's your biggest challenge?
I think the biggest challenge in War, for example, was to throw away a little bit the idea behind it from the beginning, which was to make it very hard, to make it very Souls-like, the combat. But it turns out it's much more fun to make it arcadey. And with it, the concept changed a little bit, but with all the mechanics we built, it was just working much better. And I think that's not always that easy to throw away an old idea or an old concept and change the game.
Yeah, that's absolutely understandable. Now up for my favorite question, like in every game starter. What was your most unusual or surprising task in game balancing so far? Joel.
I think I was thrown into a game where we had a currency system where you needed the currency to buy food, and the food was used to heal you on the travels over overworld map. And the thing was, we needed to balance the numbers on the goal, so you had always enough money to buy enough food, so you have always food when you travel. The thing is, it was implemented in such a way that if you didn't have food, you wouldn't die and you wouldn't lose anything. So if the player would find out that you don't need to buy food, he had too much gold for every item in the game, basically. So I need to balance that and hope that the players didn't recognize that you don't need to need to buy food. This was very unusual and surprising for me.
Well, that's awesome. Olaf, do you have something similar?
I think a surprising thing was when a publisher came to us and 2 months before we should release the game, they wanted to change the monetization system from premium to free-to-play. And I needed to change a lot in this 2 months so that it works with the free-to-play version, where the people needed to watch ads. So I needed to search for an element in the game which could be reused and needs still to be fun to replay it every time. And at the end, it worked out, but it was really surprising, and there was not a lot of time to change the system behind it. And I was even a little bit surprised that it works so good.
Christian, your biggest surprises?
Yeah, since when it comes to balancing, I can basically not create my own task, but I can propose what should be worked on, and I more or less choose the topics. I don't get surprises in that area as much, but where there is more surprises is when it comes to feedback sometimes, because sometimes you do changes and you have a clear picture in mind what happens, and suddenly the feedback goes into a very different direction. Let it be good or bad, does not even matter, but you're like, wait, I did not see that. How could I have missed this? So it happens not really often, but when it happens, it's really like, oh, wow, well, interesting. So also you never learn enough, but that happens more if you have very complex games, and our games are really complex. So there's always surprises hidden in the code or hidden in the mechanics, and that can be interesting.
So to summarize, what are the key elements of game balancing, and what questions do you have to keep in mind and ask yourself regularly? Joel.
For me, the key elements of game balancing is like, you need to remind yourself that the perception of balance is more important than the balance itself. So the players need to perceive the balance of the game as balanced, not the numbers need to be balanced, basically. And it's also helpful to make everything overpowered, to make everything epic and fun, and avoid to balance for mediocrity, basically. And as a question I always keep in mind, ask myself is first, double and half things for balancing, go big steps to find the right numbers, and also to step back and identify the root of the problem. For example, in the game Dying Light, they had the problem that the weapons would get destroyed because they lost too much durability, and the first impulse there was to increase the durability of the game, but that had the problem that the would break the economy of the game. So they stepped back and thought, how can we actually solve the issue with the weapons? And they reduced the enemy health, so yet could kill more enemies with the same durability of the weapons. So it's always important to step back and analyze what options do you have, basically.
Christian, how about you?
Yeah, I can't really double down on the double and half rule, because that would change the game very much in our case. But with the first part, I 100% subscribe. For our games also, it is not about having the numbers align perfectly, but how the game plays in the end. And as a rule of thumb that I go by is, how are the sessions of the user? So when I do balancing changes, I always question myself, does the game in certain stages still play as we want the game to play, or as the users want the game to play, right? So when we do playtesting, we don't only test the combat itself or the production or the economy, but also how the game feels and how the pacing may have changed or not. So yeah, it is not always about making numbers look pretty, but it's about making the game feel good.
Olaf, what are your key elements?
I would just agree with what Christian and Joel said. And I already mentioned with, as designer, I know the feature too good, and I need to take care that people who are playing this don't know the feature that well, and better to make it too easy than too hard. And that's it.
Well, thank you so much. Now I hand over to Helen, who will ask questions about career start, like starting a career as a game balancer.
Just as hard as talking about it, I guess. But before we jump into that, I want to sprinkle in a question from the chat. Someone asked, how do you deal with prolonged exposure to a project or feature and keep a fresh view on it so that you can also view it from the eye of the player that is going to play the game? I think you kind of like brushed past it a bit, especially Olaf, you already told us it's quite a challenge because as a designer, you know a game so well. But do you have any tips on like how you can perhaps step back and keep fresh view on things?
I mean, I think it helps if you step back a time from it and don't play it, and after some time come back and play it again without having this kind of I just worked on it for 3 hours and I don't know exactly how it feels at the moment because I changed so much and I tested it so often. And after you have a longer pause, I think it's better to judge it better, and also with a more like with a mind of a player which also don't know about the feature. Yeah, that's maybe the only tip I would have here.
Sounds good. Kind of like when you are trying to beat a very hard boss, just sleep over it. Joe, how about you? Do you have a special technique when like that fatigue sets in?
I've several approaches for that. First, the one I use at the moment, because we're in a bigger team, we just switch around the tasks. So basically, if I work on balancing the parkour part, I switch with the game designer who does the stealth part. So to get a new view on things, which is harder if you're the only game designer in a team. So if you have the possibility, I would change up my tasks. So basically, if I'm need a fresh view, I stop doing balancing and work on other stuff like level design or other departments, fixing some bugs. Or at last, I would ask a family member to play the game while I'm sitting next to the member and take notes. How do they play the game? How do they view the game? What things I'm missing because I played the game too much? So that helps a lot.
Thanks. Especially the last tip sounds like something a studio of any size or project can apply to their game. Christian, do you want to add anything to that? Do you have another technique up your sleeve?
Yeah, basically doubling down on the letting other people play the game. There's also 2 methods how to do it. When you work on something yourself, you can obviously ask friends and family, but also to make it visible to the whole team or even company, we use providers that let fresh people play the game and record the session. And then you can also ask of a specific task or play time or whatsoever, so that you get the exact picture that you want to know. Like, what does our tutorial look like to new users? What does the first hour of playing look like? What problems do they have? And with that, you can find many problems or areas to work on, or even smaller things that you don't see anymore because you got blind seeing it every day.
All right, thank you. Also, thanks to the chat for this question. Keep them coming. We will either sprinkle them in when the timing is right, just with our own questions, but we'll definitely get to all of them later in the Q&A part if they didn't fit in before. So let's head over to talking about the ideal career starter. What should someone know before they get into game balancing? And yeah, in your experience, what formal education does someone who wants to work in game balancing need? Is there even a formal education needed, or is that more like a nice to have? Drew might start us off.
I don't think you need a formal education to balance a game. You just need to have passion, and mostly you need to like numbers, because you will deal a lot with them. And also, it's really, really helpful if you do know the ins and outs of Excel. Excel is a very powerful tool, and it's necessary for most games, at least.
I'm sure most people are delighted to hear that. I mean, who doesn't love Excel? Christian, what do you think? Is there formal education needed?
No, it helps to get past the HR barrier, of course, because if I would look at the applications, I would look at them differently than someone who's not working in said area, right? So when you pass that HR barrier, I think it is definitely not necessary. What is rather helpful is if you can somehow already show off part of your skills or whatever. I know it's very subjective and just for myself it worked, but in the past I liked designing games already. I did board games before I started working in the game industry, and I was just handing in a rule book of a board game that I did, and that did the trick. That sparked interest. So if you have means to show your dedication or show your skills or whatever, that definitely helps. But I think no formal education is needed if you can show that you can do the job.
Right. So add something to your portfolio. That's also good thing to add to that, or you disagree?
Yeah, there's one thing which is maybe hard to communicate, but I think it's important to have some kind of imagination of this values you have and this numbers you enter, and to transform it into the elements you use, like HP or movement and speed, and have like this feeling of I'm changing now this value, but it feels automatically like, oh, I will now just with it, and it's not just a number, but also like this feeling of what does the number change. And yeah, this is especially for combat design, I think, important.
Makes sense. Then let's approach this from a different angle. What would you say, what hard and soft skills should a career starter bring to the table? We already heard Excel. A passion for that would be very good, and this feeling that Olaf just described, but anything else you should be capable of before, Christian?
Yeah, it would be helpful if communication is at least like a you don't need to be an expert, but you need to be able to communicate your thought process. When you are a starter, there's probably a mentor or there's people helping you to do that, but it is definitely helpful and speeding up the process if you can already do it by yourself. And also when it comes to brainstormings or working out details or doing pitches, it's always helpful if you manage to not only picture things in your head, but put them to paper or into presentations or words. Yeah, so any kind of communication definitely helps.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Joel, from your experience, what skills should someone bring to the table?
I would also double down on the communication, but I also think that's a part of, as a whole, as a game designer, you need to have strong communication skills because you have to deal with a lot of departments and communicate with them, not only for balancing, but for everything other than balancing too, like level design or prototyping, concepting with other game designers. So communication is very important. It also is really helpful if you can analyze other games. For example, especially TCGs, trading card games, help a lot if you look at them as a general starter. If you want to start into balancing too, it helps to analyze other games. How do they do it? And maybe do an Excel sheet that analyzes it for you too.
All right.
Actually,
Olaf,
I would actually add to that. The analyzing part is also important when it comes to systems. So if you see a game, if you are able to see how different parts connect with each other, or if you read rules of a board game, for example, and you see, oh, this will work out like that in the future, that's already a skill that not everyone has, and that will definitely help you becoming a good balancer or designer. So there's also something like system designer, or yeah, so you can make use of that skill.
Okay, so you already know at game board night on Sunday who has and who hasn't the skill to become a game balancer. Good to know. Olaf, do you have any other insight into what hard or soft skills someone should bring?
Maybe to keep calm. If you are someone who is impatient, I don't think it's the right job for you, because you will need to repeat it over and over again what you do. It's like nearly QAing something. And yeah, it requires a lot of iterations and play tests. Yeah.
All right. And now a service question. If someone is looking to get into game balancing or wants to have some aspect of game balancing as part of their job, what would you recommend to do? Where should they look, or for what kind of roles should they keep their eyes open? Joel, you might start us off here.
Basically, in every job I did before, if you're a game designer, you need to balance in some way or another. If you want to specialize in it, I would recommend mobile games, because in my experience, mobile games do a lot more balancing, and also there's like monetization specialists which do nothing other than balance monetization systems. Otherwise, I would recommend to, as I said, analyze other games, trading card games, mobile games. How did they do it to get started? And maybe if you write an application somewhere, add a little game balancing analysis to it, or as a to help them see that you can do that.
I hope people are taking notes right now. That sounds like a good place to start. Olaf, do you have any other recommendations?
Yeah, I would also double down the thing of just looking at other games. There are so many games which require balancing, from real-time strategy to survival games to base building, RPGs, fighting games. All games needs balancing, and all kind of have a different type of balancing. Have a look at these games and just analyze them instead of just playing them helps a lot, I think. And yep.
All right, thank you. Christian, do you have any other ideas where people should look?
Actually, no. I would just say
Okay.
game designers in general, as already mentioned, have to balance at some point. Some more, some less. It also depends on the company. So I would expect that in smaller companies, you are much more likely to also have to balance, even if you don't apply for a balancer job. Whether when you are in a very big company, there is specific balancers. So if you don't see a job offer for a balancer in a very big company, it is less likely. It doesn't mean that you won't balance there, but it's less likely than in a small company, I would say.
All right, thanks. Then I would pass the torch back to Amanda, who will continue with this service part.
Thank you. Based on your experience, is there a common mistake or misconception about the industry or about game balancing in particular you often encounter or in career starters? Christian.
I guess one of the bigger misconceptions is that balancing has to be fair. Because if a game is fair and always turns out the same way, it becomes boring. And also it creates less urge to talk about it, and also there is less room to change the game. So in general, balancing must not be fair. It should obviously play fun and feel entertaining, but if it's not 100% fair, there's much more room for changing it on a regular basis also, which then freshens up the game a bit. It depends though also on the game. Like in our games, we balance the games much not as often, because they also run very long and users need time to adjust to the balancing. So I guess in our games, they are more fair than in very fast-paced games. But yeah.
Joel, what common mistakes or misconceptions do you know?
I would double down on that what Christian said. It's really important to make the game feel balanced, not that it is balanced. And also I would say that I've seen a lot of my colleagues do was like going, if you balance numbers, they would go in like very small steps. So basically they start at 1, then go to 1.01, 1.02, 1.03, and do little steps. It's a little exaggerated, but I hope you get my point. Which helped me a lot is like start by doubling the number. It's not, you don't push that, you don't commit that, you just find the number quicker. Like if the correct number is like 1.8 and you do little steps from 1 onwards, it takes a long time. And it might happen that you spend too much time balancing the game where you could save time if you just go bigger steps. So if I go to from 1 to 2 immediately, I see, okay, 2 is a little bit too much, and then I can go to 1.5 or 1.7 and then see, okay, I can faster corner the number I really need. And that's what some game designers did, in my opinion, a little bit wrong, like going 2 small steps, and which would just take too much time in the end.
Olaf, what's your encounters on common mistakes or misconceptions?
I think I have nothing to add.
Okay, then we get to the next question. Is there anything you wished you yourself had known before entering the industry or when you were a career starter? Olaf again, because you had nothing to add right now.
Yeah, I think since I am now working in this industry, I play less games than before. So nearly, I spent so much time before with games, like hours per day, and now I'm just getting home and don't want to see games anymore. But at the same time, I need to play them as game designer, so I need also to take time for them, and they are still very fun, but it's not just the right or the same feeling as before when I haven't been in the industry. Every game was different, I would say, because I don't see also the mechanics behind it. I had a different kind of perspective on it. I don't know.
Maybe you need to switch the genres of what you're playing. Joel, how about you?
The thing I wished I would have known before I entered this career path was there will be a lot of tears. It's really hard. You basically can't enjoy games anymore in the way you did before. You always analyze it. You like play God of War, for example, walk through the snow and see you leave little path in the snow, and then you start running around in the snow for like 10 minutes and analyze how they did the snow, how did they do the animations, and really enjoying a game just for what it is hard. Also, if you have cool game ideas, people will do the game ideas before you do them, and then you will be sad. You will look onto Steam like, hey, this was a cool game. We did that like 2 years ago, and now it has like 50,000 reviews. Sadness. Those are things that would have been helpful before.
I hope that you're still happy in the industry anyways.
Yeah.
Christian, how's that for you?
For me, as I'm very happy with the job I'm doing, I think I don't miss any information, or I'm not sad that I didn't know anything earlier. But one thing that could help me adjust faster would be 2 concepts. One is named Kill Your Darlings. Sometimes you work on something and you know how it will work and how awesome it is and how much it could improve the game, but it just does not fit either for the community or for the budget you have or whatever. But basically, sometimes you need to take a step back and say, okay, I have to let it go. I can't shed any tears on that. It won't happen, although you invested a lot into it. And knowing that this will happen regularly would probably help me adjust to it faster. Yeah. And a other thing is that as a game designer, you always want to make the game better, but being faced with the reality that we also have to earn our livings with the games sometimes contradicts. So my gamer heart wants to, for example, get rid of some features where my bank account says, no, maybe you should even improve on that feature. So it's a fine balance between and in the end it should be the best outcome for the user because they will use these features. But yeah, it's sometimes a bit harder to just want to making the game better, but also making it profitable.
Thank you.
Might I add something?
Yeah, of course.
Which is also a thing that is not specific to game design, but for the industry itself. You will have the salaries in the industry are currently not good. You will get more if you want money. You will get more money in other industries. You pay a lot for your passion to do games, and making money or it's hard. Salaries aren't good in the German games industry, at least.
So you have to bring a lot of passion.
Depends on where you work at. I mean, there are some studios which posted their numbers, what they pay their employees. Those numbers were fine. Those were good numbers, but most studios don't pay good.
Yeah, that's very important to know before starting in this career. That's right. But if you want to work in that career, how should one apply to work in game balancing? Like Christian already said that he brought a rule book of a board game. So do you submit a portfolio, or if so, what would it look like? Yeah, Joel, maybe, because Christian already said pass HR and bring something special to show that you understood how game balancing works.
There's also another trick to pass. The trick to pass AR is go to events and just talk to the CEO directly, and show that you are interested, and try just talk to people, connect to people, and that makes it a lot easier to get a job in the industry. You don't need to have a master or something. You just need to be aware what you can do and improve in what you want to do. Like when I started out, for example, I did little games in RPG Maker, and then I applied for an internship at a small game studio and started there, and then went to do the studies. And but I got a lot of people who just came from being a work at a supermarket and went into game balancing or producing, or you need to do stuff at home, and you need to do stuff. You need to show that you're interested in it to do it, and that you can do it on your own, basically. Yeah.
Olaf, what would you recommend?
Yeah, especially for game balancing, I have never seen even something like a portfolio for it, but I would assume that you should showcase a game. And I mean, in a perfect world, you would have already worked on a game, or at least in this university, maybe had a project where you can showcase your features and mention every tool you used for it, and what kind of features were balanced, and in which game genre maybe. Yeah, some portfolio which showcases your work.
Christian, is there anything else you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would maybe not for the application itself, but in the process of applying for jobs, don't get upset if you don't get an answer or a no, because in the industry, jobs are budget, and budget is not always big. So sometimes job applications don't even get answered because budget plans changed, or someone else already took the job. So it is most of the time not your fault that you didn't get an answer or a no. It can very well also just be the time that is not fitting right now.
Adding up to this question, I have a question from the chat who's asking about how do you get to know the companies? Are there internships, meet and greets, or especially open door days in game design. A game design student can visit. I mean, we have the Hamburg Games Conference to meet people, and also many other events in the games industry. But is there anything else besides going to events to get into the industry, or to know which company to apply to? Sorry, Joel.
I would say the main thing are events. There are a lot of events. There are local events like in Hamburg or in North Rhine-Westphalia. There are monthly meetups where you can meet people. You can also write directly to the companies and ask if you can be there for a day. If the company has a little bit of time, you probably can just go there, look into the like sign an NDA and look at the people who work there and get a feeling how they work. We had that at Daedalic before, so I would just try that if you have local game companies. And yeah, just write them emails, ask if you could meet them or find them on events.
Christian, what would you recommend?
Similar approach. As Joel also earlier mentioned, passion is a very strong aspect in game designing due to many reasons. And if you can show this passion somehow, like show interest in the company or the job by different means, try to approach directly, maybe ask, I don't know, can I see the studio? If you don't get a yes, or if you get a no, then it was still worth a try, and get your name out there. If your name was heard by someone of the company and then the application comes in, then this name is already remembered, right? Or most likely. So it will also put you in a better position there. I don't have any like specific method, but make aware of yourself and show that you are dedicated and passionate for it.
Olaf, anything else?
Yeah, I would maybe add to it that you could also go to most of the conventions like Gamescom, where the Indie Arena booth is, for example, where every developer is really standing with the game there. And there's lots of developers, and then you can talk to them, get maybe to this industry because of it. And there's also convention like the Polaris in Hamburg. So there are often like possibilities to get in contact with developers, even if you can't find them through Google, just by coming to these conventions.
Also, on the Gamecity website, we have something that's called the company index. There you can actually check for the games companies located in Hamburg. But after a small section of naming Gamecity again and our services, I give the torch over to Helen.
Yes. Also to mention 2 other services. First up, you can also look on our website or keep your eyes open to see the next Gamecity THREAKS, where also loads of indie companies from Hamburg and also bigger companies make an appearance, and that's the perfect opportunity to maybe meet the studio of your dreams. And also a bit more frequent is the Indie Treff, which is I think 4 times a year or so, where you can also meet loads of indie developers and get more tips, or maybe even meet the next studio with a perfect job opportunity for you. The chat is very active. We've got quite a few more questions to get to. First up, someone asked in the chat, how do you start the balancing process? Do you just settle on some numbers? Like, do you just start somewhere, or how do you do that? Because for them, it's very overwhelming to start, because you can do anything, but you have nothing at the beginning. Maybe, Christian, could you tell us how do you start on a new project? How do you start to balance that?
When we start a new project or even a new game, we first sit together a lot of times, and I also For myself, it helps a lot to talk to others when we do that, because I get many more ideas when I speak them out, and they can bounce back ideas. So what we do is we sit together and think about pillars of the balancing that the game should have, like some base rules that should apply to the game. For example, how long should a game round last? Our games is played in round, and how long should it last? Should it be rather a quick game or a slow game? And once we settled on this rule set, then we look at references. Are there other games out there that do similar things? Can we learn from our other games and apply base rules from that, and just, for example, double numbers or half numbers in production times or whatever? And once we have a grid of a idea, which we usually write down in some sort of design, then we start testing. And in that stage, I would totally agree with what Joel said earlier. Don't do changes on a small level, but rather on a big level, so that you hit your goal faster. Fine-tuning comes much later. So yeah, it's first it starts with brainstorming and deciding on some basic rules of the project, which you then apply the rest on. And then you can also create your task based on these. And there's also different areas which a game has, right? There's combat, there's economy, and for every different area you need to have these rules. Like, just as an example, health should always be 5 times higher than damage. So with that, you create a pacing in the game that fights last longer. If you make them equal, fights are over much faster. So having these rules helps you coming up with numbers.
All right, thank you. Joel, how does it look like at Daedalic? How do you approach a new project in terms of balancing?
I would double down on that, like get the general idea of the game and then look for references. Look for other games in this genre, play them, look what they do good, what they do bad, and try to apply that to your own game. And which I can also add, like in general, to get started as for game balancing or games in general, do game jams. Take some of your friends for a weekend. There are basically every weekend there are some events where you have a topic and you need to do a game in 3 days, and that really helps a lot to get progress fast, to get experience fast, because you need to do a whole game in 3 days, which it makes the process a lot faster, and you learn really a lot there. So that would also be a recommendation to get started for the industry, to game jams.
All right. Olaf, do you at THREAKS take the same approach when starting a new game and trying to balance that?
Yeah, pretty much. I would maybe just add that if you start to implement a feature and then, for example, have health, don't use uneven values, like, I don't know, your health is 3 or something. That doesn't make sense. Start with something like 100, and also when the damage, maybe start with something like 1 hit does 10 damage instead of some strange values, just to get a feeling for it, and just to have a rough start, and also to understand how the HP is related to the HP bar, for example. Yeah, that's maybe one addition.
Great, thank you. Someone else asked, how much knowledge, experience, strategies, or even solid numbers or systems can you transmit from older projects you worked on? Or do you have to completely start from scratch for every game? I think this can maybe at Bytro, there is a chance to transfer some knowledge, or do you really have to start from scratch every time?
There is a chance of transferring a lot of knowledge, because we create our games on our own engine. So the base rules, the very, very base rules, will always be the same, but many changes can be applied to those. Question is, like, how much time do you have to work on a project? If you have less time, you can do also fewer changes. With more time and more resources, there more can be done. But still, even if we are able to take a lot of learning, every time we start a new project, we look at it as if we wouldn't have the basics. We know some rules that we have to apply, like how units move and such. But when it comes to balancing, or when it comes to setup of the game, we try to think how can it be created if we wouldn't have all these other things. And their research comes in, where we research other games a lot, where we try to find out what is happening in the market, because that also moves. We can't always do the same things for decades, right? So we need to adjust certain things. But one other thing, which may be a bit more particular to our case, is that we also do the marketing in-house. So we don't have any other studio. And we also have to adjust to that when we do our games, so that we can market the games properly. So there's also a lot of feedback coming from that department that says, okay, certain things have to work like this and that. But usually we take these feedbacks in after we put our initial sort of thought process in, because maybe we would miss out opportunities if we wouldn't have thought freely before.
Thank you. Joel, what's it like for you guys over at Daedalic? Do you have the chance to transfer a lot of experience from game balancing from one project to another, or do you need to start over every time?
It really depends if so if it's the same genre or a new part of a series or something, you can transfer numbers. Like if you do a farming game, for example, and then you do another farming game, you probably can transmit some experience and strategies and stuff like that. But otherwise, I think it's quite hard, and you should start anew most of the time. What you can take over is knowledge, how to work with the engine or Excel or other programs. For example, if you're well versed in Excel, you have a head start in every game basically. So and that helps you for your whole career basically. But otherwise, yeah, it's very, very genre dependent, I think, if you can take something over or not.
Olaf, I would imagine Project Morph is unlike any other game you guys have done before, so maybe you get to start from scratch there, or?
It was built with a framework from Battle Planet before.
Mm-hmm.
It was also a top-down shooter, but yeah, the features completely changed, because now the whole combat system was evolved through timelines instead of just values, and I needed to adjust a lot of different animation timings instead of just values. I needed to change the clip, for example, how fast the animation should play. That was a little bit different, and in general, nearly every project we made so far is very different to each other, so we couldn't really take over much stuff. But I would recommend to do it, because with the experience, you can just make a better experience in the next title, which many bigger publishers are doing. But still, I would double down what Christian said, that you should always have a clear head and not reuse everything you already had, but really rethink it.
Fresh plate is definitely a good idea. Most projects. We also have a very important question from the chat, which is, what do you even consider good game balancing? Olaf, let's talk again. What would you say is good game balancing?
Yeah, good game balancing is if nothing what you do feels. I think we had the discussions with Christian before, but it just needs to feel right. It doesn't need to be fair, but it needs to feel just right. And that's many different parts which come together. It's not only the values and the balancing behind it, but also the visuals, like animations, and how does maybe an enemy look like. If he looks like you can shoot him once because he's very small and very weak, then it doesn't feel right that you need to shoot him 10 times. And yeah, it's a combination of the art department, the balancing, and also of the feedback with sound and VFX.
That makes sense. Christian, you, as Olaf said, you kind of answered the question earlier, but do you want to add anything?
For me, it's also important, or in general, I would say, if the balancing leaves room for decisions, if everything is set and you always have to take the same path, there is less freedom for a user to play the game. It is very genre specific. Sometimes you need to guide a user into a certain situation, and then you can give decisions. It also depends on which stage the user is, but in general, being able to experience or make different experience with the game each time you play it helps the game to be healthy when it comes to maintaining users or players. And yeah, so for me, it's important if the balancing allows for decisions. Yeah.
And Joel, what does good game balancing feel like for you or your team?
I think everything was said. I totally agree with the other two.
Wonderful. What a compliment to the other two. But another question to you, I think you kind of answered this before, but like just to lay it out all proper again. Someone asked, how are the game mechanics and the balancing integrated? Are they two separate working teams, or do they work in one team and say, we can do that if you work on this? Like, how does it work for you?
We work together there, so it goes hand in hand together. So game mechanics and balancing, those I also don't think they should be separate. You always need to think of the other, and yeah, it's just a cooperation, and yeah.
Yeah, makes total sense. I'd say, Christian, for you, it's perhaps the same, right?
In a perfect world, I would have a say in everything we do, in marketing, in monetization, in feature development, because everything we do for the game influences the game. Just for example, if we were to implement a feature that gives a user free things, and a balancer or a game designer is not included into it, then the economy of the game can be changed without the balancer knowing, right? So suddenly the source of truth, basically, which is the game, changed, and that's dangerous. Of course, you can't have your fingers everywhere, but yeah, everything that affects the game, you at least need to be aware of as a balancer. Maybe you don't necessarily have to work on it, but you should be aware of everything.
Makes sense. Another question from the chat, how much of the player feedback do you take into consideration when balancing? How do you distinguish normal feedback from feedback that is basically just gamers being angry and kind of mad about changes? I think, Christian, maybe you have to deal with that the most. How do you handle that?
Yeah. So we differentiate the feedback in many layers. One would be, where does the feedback come from? So there is like user-generated discords. There's our own Discord. There's in-game chat. There's tickets that users can write, and every different platform is evaluated differently. We look at all those platforms, and write down the feedback for ourselves. And even in the feedback of an angry user, there may be truth in it, right? The wording is just different. So if we take feedback from those different sources, from our own experience, from the users, from the tickets, and so on, we can draw a bigger picture and we can see, so actually these all are connected and there is an issue we have to fix. And then we can also rule out the outliers or the really only angry guys, because they don't match up with all the other feedback that we get. And then we are able to more or less implement changes for the important or right feedback. I don't know if you can say it like that, but and the other thing is, and I'm very happy that we have it, our community is also very active when it comes to wanting the game to improve. So they even create Excel sheets themselves where they say, hey, we figured out this and that works like this. I don't know if it's intended, or we think it should change like this, or they also gather feedback in a comprehensive way so that we can easier work with it. So that helps a lot as well, having this active and caring community in general.
That sounds great, actually. Joe, how do you handle player feedback for your games?
I mean, so
think
it's a little bit different because we don't have a live game. So we need to test in our bubble, basically. So family, friends, testers. So we take all the feedback into consideration. And then we need to split in different types. Like, is it objective feedback? Is it not intended? Then we can fix it immediately. Or is it subjective? So it's either like we have someone found a problem or a balancing problem, and on a subjective basis, and so we wait for more feedback to come in. So we have like 20 people reporting in on the same part of the game, for example, and then we need to see, okay, is it a problem in general? Do most players agree with the one player? If not, maybe we don't need to address it. But if we are unsure, we can still do focus tests with, okay, we have the problem that this might be a problem. Let's do a focus test with the QA or with family and friends and see how do they feel about this subjective problem, for example. Yeah.
All right, thank you. Olaf, how do you handle player feedback in regards to balancing?
Yeah, I think what Christian once mentioned, to record the play session, is pretty important for it, because it's often that a feature seems to be the issue, like yeah, the magazine is too small or something, but maybe it's not really this one, but something what happened just right before it, that he maybe made a dodge roll, and because of that he couldn't reload, and maybe we need to then reconsider how he can reload maybe during the dodge or something like this. And then you try to balance something which isn't really broken. It's just because the player maybe get confused because of the controls, and he doesn't use the controls the way it is intended. And then everything looks like, oh, the balancing is shitty. It's not good and maybe problematic, but it's more like a different feature which isn't working how it is supposed to. And because of that, I think it's very important to always have recordings and also talk to the people afterwards and let them explain why they think the problem is like that. And maybe they even on their own reconsider and think about it and see, oh, maybe it wasn't really this what I was hating about, but something different.
Yeah, that makes sense. We've got two more questions and then we'll wrap it up. One that I think is aimed at Christian. How hard is it to hide the numbers and systems from the players? And how much can you actually hide them until the player is confused? Like you said, your community is very Excel based as well.
How hard is it to hide numbers? We did a recent update where we tried to make them more visible, actually, so that users can create their strategies more planned out and also know outcomes a bit better. But when we want to hide something, it is not a value that we hide. It's more like a mechanic, I would say. Like sometimes things, I can give one example, maybe how units heal. We don't write out on the unit, this heals this and that much when this and that happens. It's just a base rule that applies to all units, more or less. And that's not written out anywhere. So it is not about hiding, actually. It's more about what information is necessary most of the time to the user, because also space on the screen is very precious, right? So we cannot show everything always. We need to make decisions when which information is most important. And we try to give the informations that are needed to make strategies while hiding or not showing features that are not concerning your day-to-day business. Of course, some users think information X is more important than information Y, but then we also need to think, how do new users see it, right? Because they need to learn the game first. So a very experienced user sees different value in information than a new user. It's a balance again, like our topic here, but yeah, we don't intentionally hide things. We more or less decide this is not as important as that.
All right, a great balance. Thank you. Then last question for tonight, question from the other side. We already talked about where can people find a place to balance games, but also someone asked in the chat where they can find a game balancer for their indie game. Is there a specific place to look? And I would say all of the wonderful events that we have already mentioned, but maybe you guys also have an idea where someone might pick up one of your colleagues. Olaf, do you have any input?
I would maybe check just LinkedIn, but that's the only place I would now think about, other to the already mentioned one.
Good place to start, definitely. Joel or Christian, do you have any other ideas?
You could go LinkedIn, you could try Discord, or there's Facebook groups for that too, where you might be able to find someone.
All right, good place to start, definitely. Christian nods in agreement. So
yeah, when you search for someone, I would also use these sources if you are looking to get into the industry. We already mentioned many areas. Also, always check out the pages of the companies that you're interested in, or in general that you can find. Almost all companies, or at least those that I checked out regularly, were having a category where you can see careers. And even if your position that you're looking for is not there, maybe try still to apply, write an application. Maybe they need you and didn't know.
all right, I'd say that's a wrap. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Thanks to a wonderful panel for sharing your expertise. A shout out also to the three companies, Bytro, THREAKS, and Daedalic. If you're interested in working there, head over to their websites. Aside from that, thanks for tuning in. If you don't want to miss the next Game Starter, either subscribe to our channel, visit our Discord, follow us on social media, or head over to our website where you can also find the wonderful things that Amanda told you about, like the company index to find your next job, our job board on Discord, or all the other great gaming events happening in Hamburg. So that's from us tonight. I hope we'll see you someday in the future, and I hope we inspired you with some game balancing knowledge. So good night. See you.